So, in thinking about secular morality, we have now created a world which seems to be a nightmare, which seems to be all demanding, and where we don't have a mechanism which would allow us to reasonably draw a boundary and say no to moral demands surrounding us and to moral expectations. There is no mechanism to exit the game. There is no mechanism which would allow for personal freedom and personal choice. Since, again, interests are defining of moral obligations. There must be something wrong with this conception. And one way of approaching this, even though I'm not sure I can solve this, is by looking at contexts in which I think we would all agree certain interests can get unhinged, in the sense of certain interests can get bracketed or, if you want, discharged, ineffective. In other words, certain interests are binding until they aren't anymore. And this is, I think, a reality we can all easily point to, right? You are interested in something, you are following something up until you don't. We always experience that. This is a constant feature of human consciousness as well. Not only does consciousness have interests, does it come with first-person reality and relating to certain experiences, but we have an attention span and we have an ability to, we ourselves, shifting our interests. So for some weird reason, we are capable of unhinging certain interests that we held up until recently and suddenly find them irrelevant anymore. Or, let's put it in that way, not as important as we thought they were just up until recently. So consciousness has this weird feature about it, that not only are those interests just passively given to us, but we have agency over them. We as bearers, if you want, of other people's moral obligations, we have agency over the interests that are defining us. This is such a weird feature. It goes together with our ability to focus our attention. If we were nothing but our interests, if we were nothing but our experiences, we will basically be jumping from wanting to wanting, right? From a first-person experience of being interested in something to being interested in something else. And this is not really how human experience looks like. Human experience can flow between different interests. It can, even within one day, you can wake up with something feeling very close to you, and that you being the subject of experience. And in the wake of that single day, you can feel like what you woke up with and what was present to your mind is not there at the evening of the day. You've gone through an entire path of shifting your locus of attention, shifting even your goals to a certain degree during that time span. So consciousness does seem to have this intrinsic ability to not only make demands, but also to magically undo demands and transform them and replace them with other demands, which makes the whole thing really weird and difficult. Because so far we had a world in which you had like static things, like interests, I think we thought of in a similar way as if they were objects, right? Just as there are all objects out there, we thought of, there are interests out there. And the moment you have interests in this world, you have moral demands that are being put onto others. And now we're figuring out, very contrary to the physical reality that we're thinking about, interests pop into existence and they disappear just as easily. Or particularly they shapeshift, they become something different. And what defines you at one moment in time can become something that you feel ashamed for a short period of time later. I think we've all experienced that, but particularly in longer periods of time, when you look at personal development, many of the things that defined us at a certain age, when looking back, they feel something we feel ashamed for, right? And this is a point that Wilber's been making, that you usually feel development precisely like that. You feel when you have made a sense, when you have made steps towards development, it feels like you are ashamed for a certain self-image that you once held, right? Looking back at those impulses that were driving you and things that were important to you. I mean, I can clearly remember as a child, for example, I was obsessed with looking up the speed of cars. I'm not sure I would say I feel ashamed for that, but I think it's ridiculous looking back at that. I mean, if this would define my present day identity, if I had an urge the moment I leave my home to run to the next car and see at the tachometer and tachometer and see the speed of the car, whether it's 220 or 240 or imagine even 280 kilometers an hour, that was just weird. This just wouldn't feel right. So we have this weird feature again about consciousness, that not only can it create moral demands, it can pulverize them. It can undo them as well. So even if we face a situation of someone not living up to our moral demands in certain, or our interests, in certain cases it actually happens, and I believe this is something we all know as well, that someone not responding to what you want actually gets you to change what you want, actually gets you to change your subjectivity. And this all has become such a mess now, right? There are so many factors now already. Experiences are nothing like objects we just observe. They pop into existence. They have they are bound to the way we relate to them, but they are also bound to our imaginative powers and our capacity of imagine ourselves to be someone, right? They're not just there. They're not just, and that's interesting, because what I'm just describing seems to be true mostly, and if not only, of the human realm. When you look at the animal realm, you don't have this possibility of the organisms undoing their own moral demands that are putting on the world surrounding them. So their agency seems so much more limited that they're pretty much caught up with their interests. And where you know that what they express to be an interest will be an interest in a few days from now and will be an interest in a few years from now. So the experience of hunger is not something they can undo. While with human beings, you have this super weird situation that human beings can consciously choose to not eat. And experience this is something that's liberating, as something that they themselves would deem to be a higher goal or a higher interest than the immediate giving in to their impulse of hunger and feeding themselves. But again, with animals, you don't have that. So with animals, you don't have this ability of, once they've made a moral demand on the world, to they themselves undo that moral demand and change their mind and think about it differently. It seems that's not how it works. So with animals, you can pretty much be sure the way they express their interests will remain relatively stable. And here, interest, again, and demand pretty much coincide. And there is no way of unhinging that. There is no way for the organism itself to change that, to change an interest into something that it feels ashamed for. I'm not sure about, again, higher animals. I think dogs at certain times show a sense of reflective emotions like shame. I'm not sure about that. Maybe those animals are capable of shifting and distancing themselves enough from their interests But by and large speaking, again, the rule that we've been picking out now, which complicates the whole thing, but on the other hand gives us hope that there might be a way out of this nightmare that every single interest becomes an obligation, at least for within individuals, within human individuals, mostly grown-ups as well, there is the possibility of undoing the binding part of moral obligations through reflection and through the very fact of changing your mind on issues and changing the way you experience reality. And what is this dependent on? This is something that I'm not really sure I can really make sense of. I think the few bits and pieces that I have here is that our ability to distance ourselves from our own personal interests, the wantings that are driving us, has to be compatible with our narrative of who we are as human beings and who we want to become. And that is usually pretty complex. That is not just, it's usually not just one narrative, it's usually many narratives woven together. It's many metaphors that we use, and they all come together to guide our attention and to define our sense of self-identity, of who we are. Or when somebody asks the question, who are you? When you start responding to that, you usually start telling a story, which then mingles with another story and yet another story. And all those seem to have the power, coming together, seem to have the power of undoing at least the moral demands that we put on others by structuring them and bringing them together into a world that has higher and lower demands. A world that has, for example, it might be the higher demand or the higher interest for example, self-mastery. It might be something that is more attractive to you as a human being than the immediate response to your hunger and the immediate response to bodily needs, right? This conflict of interests with each other and our ability to manage these interests and coordinate them within a narrative, that seems to be something that's new to the picture that we've painted so far. Because again, it allows for, not by reference to some kind of higher power, but again, we're still within the realm of experience, the world, consciousness. We have the ability to undo certain interests in the name of others and in the name of certain stories that we want to cohere by and that we feel are representative of who we want to be as a human being. And that's an interesting feature. I'm not sure it can really help us disentangle the whole mess, but I think it is a step into the right direction of how you can actually say no to moral demands surrounding you.